My brother Mark was 12 years old when my grandfather in Glasgow, Scotland, had taken ill and wasn't expected to survive. My parents took the next available flight to Scotland and had to leave us kids behind in Chicago. I was too young at the time to understand what has happened, but Mark had figured out that our grandpa Joe was dying. Mark was very upset by the news and was heartbroken that he couldn't go to see our grandpa one last time. I was too young to have had the privilege of knowing Grandpa Joe, but from the stories I have heard, he was a very loving man who adored his grandchildren. A few days after my parents left, Mark went into the basement of our house to grab some clothes from the drying machine. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he froze about 30 feet away from the feet of the stairs. There is a doorway to a utility room in the basement. Just as Mark reached the bottom of the stairs, he saw a figure step into view. It was Grandpa Joe. He was smiling at Mark and holding a white box. He didn't say nothing. He just smiled. And then he walked past the doorway and was gone. My brother ran back upstairs in hysterics, telling our babysitter that he had seen our grandfather needed to talk to my parents. The babysitter reluctantly let my brother call Glasgow, and when he reached my parents and told them the story, they tried to soothe him and tell him that everything was okay, that his imagination was playing tricks on him, because he was worried about Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe had passed away while my parents were on their flight heading to Glasgow, and my parents didn't have the heart to tell Mark the sad news over the phone. Fast forward to 20 years later, my brother and I visited my mom in Florida. One night we stayed up talking late about family, and the conversation turned to our Grandpa Joe. After reminiscing about Grandpa Joe and his good nature, my brother said to my mom, "You and Dad never believed me when I told you that I saw Grandpa in the basement." My mom looked puzzled and asked Mark, "When did you see Grandpa Joe in the basement?" My mom had remembered talking to Mark the morning that her and my dad arrived in Scotland, but she hadn't remembered the specifics of Mark's story. Mark retold the story, but this time when it was over, my mom was speechless. After a few moments, she broke the silence and asked Mark to describe the box that Grandpa Joe was holding. Mark said that it looked like a white rectangular box that was 3 feet long and had a width and height about 1.5 feet. Something about his description of the box made my mom get tears in her eyes. She collected herself and told us both for the first time that one of our aunts had a stillborn baby at almost the same time that my grandpa passed away. The child and Grandpa Joe were buried in the same grave, and the child was buried in a small white coffin.